and welcome back. You just joined us, or you're tuning in now. This is Politico's Competitive Europe Week. We're here to talk about tech champions. My name is Aoife White, and I am Politico's Technology and Competition Editor at Politico. If you want to talk about us, please do so. We're on social media, and the hashtag is Politico Competitive Europe Week. I'm here in Brussels with Stefan Schnorr, the State Secretary for Germany's Federal Ministry for Digital and Transport. And joining us by video is Carme Artigas-Brugal, the co-chair of the UN AI Advisory Body and a senior fellow at the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. Many of you may remember her from the recent Spanish presidency when she was the Spanish State Secretary for Digitalization and AI. Carme, can I ask you where you are right now? I hope it's somewhere sunny.
Yeah, I'm in Madrid right now. Just arrived 1 day ago from the UN, from the United Nations General Assembly Week, which is very, very intense as a result of our publication of the report, Governance AI for Humanity. So I'm very, very happy to be here. Sorry not to be able to be there in person.
I want to talk about EU tech champions, and it feels like that line already has several questions in there. I mean, when I think about EU tech companies, we could think about ASML or SAP. ASML makes the machines that make chips, and SAP is a business software provider. But when we talk about tech champions, we often talk about much bigger companies. We think about the Magnificent Seven, these big US firms mostly. I mean, the first question I would say is, I mean, there's the tech champions part of it, but also EU. Do we need EU tech champions? Do we need those kind of champions that come from here? Stefan?
Yeah, absolutely. We need champions, also tech champions here in the European Union. I'm happy that we have successful companies like Apple, like Microsoft, like Amazon in other parts of the world, and I also use them. But at the end, I'm European, and I wish that we also have such giants here in our continent, in Europe. And therefore, we have to work, I think, very hard in this field. When we look in the past, you mentioned some companies we have and had in Europe, big companies especially in the industrial sector, like car manufacturers, like engineering machines, like Siemens. Yeah, we have in the chemical industry in Germany, for example, BASF. So these are big companies from the industrial sector, but now in the digital sector, indeed, the biggest companies comes not from Europe, they come from US and they come from China. And therefore, it's our task that we give a regulatory framework and that we give framework conditions for companies that they can scale up also here in Europe, because we need them for our economic growth and at the end for the prosperity of all of us, because without successful companies, we will not have prosperity for the people. And therefore, it is our task to make the framework conditions in the right way so that companies also can scale up very fast, because in the digitization, the scaling up process is very fast and you don't need so much money at the beginning by funding a company. In former times, when you build a car manufacturer, you need a manufacturer, you need a lot of money. But to build up a digital company, at the beginning, you don't need so much money and you can scale up worldwide very, very, very soon. And therefore, it is our task that we also have such companies here in Europe, also with a view to our sovereignty. Yeah, we want to take the opportunity also of companies from all over the world, but we also need such giants here in Europe.
Carme, how important is it that we have tech champions that are from the EU?
Absolutely important for our competitiveness, but as the Secretary of State already mentioned, we don't lack entrepreneurship, we don't lack capacity of innovation. In fact, we have the same number of startups created per year in Europe than in the United States. But we don't have an efficient financing model, an investment model, to allow for unicorns to give birth here, but also to grow and become scale-ups. That's a problem. We don't have a problem for startups. We have a problem for scale-ups because we lack 1 billion size funds. We only have 3, while in the States you have more than 50 or probably 100, I don't know the figures. So first of all, I welcome very much the initiative of the European Investment Bank on the European Tech Champions Initiative with the aim to have more venture capital funds investing in Europe, which have a bigger size. That is number one. Second one is that we must understand that the only reason why unicorns grow is because in the digital market, the only way to be profitable is through economies of scale. And therefore, we need to see our market as a unique digital system. Without this, we cannot be competitive. And so the direction we have taken the last 5 years, moving from directive to acts and regulation, having just one unique framework for the 27 member states, I think is the right direction. But we need to accompany this with more easiness in mergers and acquisitions within the digital sector. I think that is critical to also make Europe more competitive.
The instructions that Henne van der Koenen got from Ursula von der Leyen, where she created a tech sovereignty profile for Henne, and there's a very strong stress on security and on the importance of having a European infrastructure. What is, for you, tech sovereignty?
Tech sovereignty means that we are able in Europe to build our own products, to build our own applications. Made in Europe by fulfilling the European requirements, but indeed produced and made here in Europe. So that in the worst case, we are able, if we cannot use technology from other parts of the world, and we are living in very complicated global situation at the moment. We have a war here in Europe, never before we thought about this. Today we have our reunion day in Germany, so it's holiday in Germany today. And when we look back about 35 years, we never have thought that we will have a war in Europe, yeah? And therefore it is so important that we are able to have our own products, that we have our own supply chains, that we have our own value chains and not depend on products or applications from other parts of the world. And this means sovereignty, not autarky, but it means indeed technologically sovereignty here for our continent.
Carmen, you're sitting in New York. How do you see tech sovereignty? How do you see this European debate now?
I think that for me, the word sovereignty means capacity to decide. That means that we have options, that we just not rely on third-party technology and third-party critical infrastructures to drive the profit from our businesses. And of course, there are new critical infrastructure with cheap manufacturing or availability of data, and we are very rich on that. I think we can build on that success stories, and we can build that into strong points. But we sometimes try to compete in the areas we are not good at. I think the United States is very good in very particular areas, especially non-regulated markets driven by digital. But we are much better in other markets, which have to do with the vertical application of AI in our car industry, biotech industry, new materials, energy. And sometimes we have like the herd effect that when something there is a hype somewhere, our money goes there instead of keep on investing on the areas we are strong at. So I think we need to have a right balance between interdependency, which is normal in a globalized world with the US and with China, not full dependency, but also built on our strength and not on the strength of the others.
I mean, when we talk about EU tech champions, the other side of it is tech champions and huge firms. And we have seen the emergence in digital of these huge tech firms. Is that desirable? Is that what we want? Do we want to create a small number of large European tech firms, or what is the aim that we should be going towards?
At the end, I think we need the right balance between giants, but on the other hand, we need competitiveness. This is very important for us, yeah? And therefore, we also need smaller firms. When we look, for example, in Germany, we have some big companies, but 99% of the economy in Germany are SMEs. Smaller companies, not the big champions. Yeah, so we need at the end both, and the 99% of the companies in Germany that are SMEs are most relevant for our economic growth in Germany, and it is more diverse also if we have different sectors. But we have to look not only on the European, not only on the German, not only on the European market, we have to look at the global market. And in the global market, we have big giants. And therefore, it is so important that we also have such giants in Europe. No monopolies, this is absolutely clear. But on the other hand, we need the right balance between, and therefore we have to look at the regulatory framework, competition law, merger law, antitrust law. Yeah, in the past, we thought more and more only within Europe. For example, the case of Siemens and Alstom, we all remember. Indeed, the new company would be too great for Europe, but not too great for the world. And at the end, the competitors are not European companies. The competitor in this area are companies, for example, from China. And to be competitive to them, we also need such a giant here in Europe. And this is another thinking for the future, that we have to look at the global market and not only at the European market. But absolutely clear, we want to have competition, and we also need this backbone of our economy, smaller companies as well as big companies.
I would say some of the market share for big tech companies is much, much bigger than Siemens Alstom.
I know,
Yeah.
but therefore we have to work indeed in this direction, because the market share of the tech giants is not comparable to the other companies. And therefore it is our task to make the right framework conditions that such companies also can grow up in Europe.
Karma, how do you see this, the making?
No, I totally support the vision of Secretary of State. I think we have a problem of size. First of all, we are not aware of how important is our market size, 600 million consumers. Nobody can be competitive globally without Europe. And so I really defend that we set up our rules of the game of our market, but our companies must be competitive globally. And then we have a problem of size, as the Secretary of State has mentioned. So we have this dichotomy. We have small and medium companies that we can make them very competitive because they're very agile, but we need these big tech champions also to consolidate this business in Europe, because otherwise they cannot be competitive for these economies of scale. But I think it is important that we also align the European investments, public investments, in a more harmonized way within Europe. We cannot compete Spain against France, against Germany, against Italy for a plant for semiconductors. We need to have a European strategy, understanding where is the best place to put this factory, this assembly line, this investment, this R&D center. Because if we see that in a global way, then there are a lot of synergies. And if we add all the investments we are devoted to every single country to that, is huge. But we divide it in 27, that's very small. So I think we need to start thinking big, because we are big, but we are not acting as big. And in this digital market, as I mentioned, you're only competitive with the economy of scale.
Stefan, to ask you a question which might be difficult to answer. Do we need a tech giant, or do we need a tech ecosystem? Do we need clusters?
Both.
I mean, you talked about SMEs.
Both.
How do you do both?
We need the tech ecosystem so that all companies have the possibility to grow up in this system. But on the other hand, we also need, for the worldwide competition, we also need giants in some niches. Yeah. So therefore, at the end, it's not so easy, but we need the right balance between both. When we look, for example, in the telecommunication industry, we have Nokia, we have Ericsson here in Europe. On the other hand, we have Huawei in China. And Huawei is very successful because Huawei also gets more support by the government. There is no regulation about state aid law, for example, in China, but we have such a regulation in Europe. And therefore, it is important that we have the same framework conditions for the companies in Europe. That means, as Carmen said, indeed financing. The European investors are more risk averse, like the investors, for example, in Silicon Valley in US or in other parts of the world. Then we have parts of the world where we have financing also by funding by the state. This is not possible in Europe. Therefore, we have to find the right balance. And what we need is indeed an innovation-friendly and open regulatory framework. When I look in the past, in the last years, we have built up so many regulations for the digital sector in Europe, the DMA, the DSA, the eIDAS regulation, the AI Act. Carmen, this is for me the best example when I look at, or when I think about the AI regulation, and Carmen is in person the best example how we can solve the problems of the future. Because when she started as a secretary, state secretary in the Spanish ministry for the interests of Spain. And then there was a Spanish presidency of the European Union, and Carmen works very hard for the AI regulation on European level. And now she is co-advisor at the AI board. So artificial intelligence, perhaps we will go more in details also in this area. Artificial intelligence and the regulation is for me a very good example. How can we make the regulatory framework so open and innovation friendly that companies in Europe can grow and scale up? We do not need only all the regulations that we had in the past. Now we need a consolidation of all these regulations, and we need a very easy way to implement this regulation in the national law. And the problem from my side in Europe in the past was we have, for example, the AI Act. But at the end, we have 27 member states in the European Union. And the implementation of the AI Act could, and this is a little bit a danger for me, could be very different in the 27 member states. And if you have a company who wants to bring up AI application on the market, for the giants, it is not so easy. They have enough stuff to find the right regulation for all the 27 member states of the EU. But if you are a startup, a smaller companies, and you want to bring up your application on the European market, and you have to fulfill perhaps 27 different regulations in detail, not the AI Act is for the whole of the European Union, but perhaps the implementation is very difficult in the 27 member states. The companies do not have, the experts do not have the money to fulfill all these regulations. Therefore, from my point of view, in the next years, we don't need more regulation in the field of digitization. We need a consolidation, and we need an implementation that is innovation friendly, without red tape, reduce bureaucracy, and see also where we have perhaps over-regulation, and then to cut this over-regulation in the EU.
Do you already see over-regulation in tech, and where? What would you cut if you could cut?
Yeah, for example, when we go to the GDPR, I think the GDPR is not the problem, but the implementation of the GDPR is a problem, especially in my country, in Germany, because we have 17 in Germany, 17 authorities responsible for the GDPR. And every of these 17 authorities has another opinion. What does it mean? So this is for me more relevant and not innovation friendly if we have different implementations of the rules in Europe. Therefore, we want to have the single market, and to build up giants, to build up or to be successful also in the digital world in the future, we need this single market with the same rules in Spain, in Germany, in Norway, and wherever, and not different rules in these countries. So we have to fulfill the single market, and then we have to look especially where do we have, from my opinion, not in the regulation, but in the implementation of EU law in the member states.
Karma, two questions for you. I mean, first of all, about tech ecosystems. I mean, how do you make them happen? But I mean, we also were bringing up the point about over-regulation or deregulation. Do you see a place for that, or is it too soon in the cycle? I mean, a lot of these new laws, as you very well know, are still very new, and we don't yet see them working.
No, I totally agree. We need to harmonize regulation and make it simple, especially for small and medium businesses. So the big techs are the ones that are complaining, but they have no problem in adapting to our rules. But our SMEs, we need to make them easy. And I agree that we did that very bad in the past because we had 27 directives in every single country. But now with the EU AI Act is a good example of one regulation for 27 countries. And that, I think, is giving us a competitive advantage that we are not still aware of, because we are creating certainty for the consumers and certainty for the citizens. We see the opposite way in the United States. They do not have a federal law. They have different laws in every state, California, Florida, Arizona. They have just vetoed a law that was already passed. So there's a lot of uncertainty and liabilities in the market. We are creating a safe market for the development. I think we need to take advantage of that, making very easy, providing easy tools for SMEs to adapt, and please do not make any changes at the national level. I've already seen some countries that try to use the AI Act as an umbrella, but they have their personal version of it. Please do not do that. But the beauty of it is that we have one regulation for 27 countries. Apart from this, I'm sorry for that.
That's fine.
We have also.
So it's important that we create certainty. And when we say about AI, I think that as Europeans, we should not be so obsessed in having our next large language model. I think the important competitive factor for AI in Europe is that we adapted to make our companies more productive. So large language models are like operating systems. You have three: Microsoft, Apple, or Linux. You are not more or less competitive if you use Linux or Microsoft. It depends on the applications you build on it. So I think that while we invest in general purpose tech in Europe, which is fine to have a new champions or open source alternatives, I think we should focus more on how we adapt AI on each our particular markets, because all these general purpose models and systems are not going to evolve more with open data. They can only improve with private data. That is what our companies have. So given that we have the Data Act, given that we have the need to locate our data in data centers in our region, I think it's a great opportunity that our vertical industries adapt AI, finding the right solutions to be more competitive themselves. And that is going to create a serious competitive advantage. And my second point is that we probably need to think beyond the traditional concept of what it means to be a European company anymore. It's not a European company, a US-based or listed company that creates 10,000 jobs in Europe, invests whatever amount of money in R&D and generates value to European companies, more than a Spanish or French company funded 80% by an American hedge fund and settled in Delaware or listed in the NASDAQ. So probably you need to think a little bit beyond what is a traditional way to localize companies, because in the digital world, they are all delocalized. So I think for me, a European company is the one that creates value in Europe, because it creates jobs, it creates value for companies, it pays its taxes, it makes investments. So the coexistence with big tech is not a bad thing, because there's a lot of technology transfer and know-how transfer also to our small and medium businesses.
Stefan, do you want to comment?
Yeah, one short addition also to your last question: where do you see an overregulation? When we have the debate and the discussion about the EU AI Act, as you know, we were strictly against the regulation of generative AI. Our opinion was that we need regulation for the application, but not for the models. At the end, we have a solution where we also have this regulation for the models and for generative AI. I think it's okay, but now, as I mentioned before, it is so important that we take care by implementation of these rules. But what is more important, we have the European AI Act at the moment. But it is not enough for companies to be successful worldwide to have the regulation of the EU AI Act, because they want to scale up worldwide. And therefore, in addition to the AI Act, we started within the G7 and the Hiroshima Code of Conduct to find similar rules or the same rules for the big countries worldwide, for the economic leaders within the G7. And now we have this Hiroshima Code of Conduct, and more than 50 countries worldwide are agreed to these principles. And this is very, very important. So these countries also have to implement these principles in their national law. But to have a common understanding is, for my opinion, extremely important. This is the G7. And now we have the OECD with Karma Artigas. And the OECD is working on these principles, to concrete these principles. We have the GPAI. We also discussed here within a Politico debates about the GPAI is now a part of the OECD. I think this is absolutely the right way. And this is so important that we have as much as possible countries worldwide that agree to the same principles, that have similar rules, because at the end, a company in Spain, in Germany, in which member state ever, that builds up a new application can scale these applications worldwide. And this is the basis to be or to become a giant also in the future. And in Europe, we have to say we have not so much applications. And I think AI and the data economy is the future of our economy. We have not so much successful companies in the AI sector at the moment, but we have worldwide one of the best research landscapes in Europe in the field of AI. So our problem is to bring these results of R&D into concrete products. And therefore, we have to work with all the things that we mentioned before. But to find the same rules, I think this is the key for our companies to be successful in the future.
Well, I mean,
let me add one reason. Let me add one nuance on this. That's precisely the business case of the recommendation we have issued at the UN level. Governing AI for Humanity is a recommendation. How can we govern AI at a global level? We don't want, isolated regions on regulation. We need to tend to a harmonized regulation at a global level, and also on standards exchange and a recurrent policy dialogue in important topics such as safety, safeguards, and as you mentioned, alignment in ethic guidelines. And what happens now is that a lot of initiatives that are very diverse, they only reflect part of the world. Only 7 countries are present in all these initiatives, but there are more than 118 countries in the world that are not even sitting in the table. Mm-hmm. So what we need now is a harmonized vision of the development of AI to have all the opportunities that everybody is accessible to those benefits. We need to guarantee, equality in the access and inclusivity in the access. That means creating ecosystems when we have access to data, but also to computing power. I mean, we have 100 computers in the world, and there is no single one in the global south. So this is the problems we need to approach. And as Europeans, we need to be able to understand that one thing is ethics, another thing is governance, another thing is regulation. For me, ethics are agreements on how we should behave well as companies, as developers, as our governments in the use of AI. But governance is what are the instruments that we need to put in place to ensure that companies and governments behave ethically. And regulation is one of these tools, but it's not the only one. Mm-hmm. So I think we lack transparency, because as you know, this technology is not developed in the academia, it's developed in R&D centers, in private companies that are very opaque. This is why in the AI Act, we do not regulate general purpose products and systems, but we demand them for transparency, because if you are an SME in Europe and you need to use the black box of ChatGPT to develop your own solution, you cannot inherit the systemic risk that those black boxes can pose if they are not transparent. So I think this is the objective, to have alignment in regulations, but no, they are exactly the same, standard exchange, and a common understanding of the opportunities and the risks.
One of the ideas that Mario Draghi had in his report was about creating a European version of DARPA, that this US agency that went out and did a lot of blue sky research and helped get the internet going. Funding is a big question for Europe anyway, but is that kind of model of selecting early winners something that's helpful to try and give very speculative money maybe to smaller companies or research in the hope that they would grow into the next big thing?
Yeah, this could be one possibility. As I mentioned before, I think we have to think about the current competition, state aid, antitrust law, and so on. What can we do to have a better, perhaps also consolidation on the market, not a policy-driven consolidation, but a market-driven consolidation in some areas is, in my opinion, absolutely necessary. But at the end, the companies have to decide if they want to consolidate, if they want to cooperate, whatever they want to do. And our task as politicians is to see where are barriers and how can we remove such barriers for such cooperation, for market-driven cooperation. The other area is indeed when we look, for example, to the US, we have the DARPA, and the DARPA brings a lot of innovation on the market. And we started in Germany, and I think we have to think more on this on European level. Some years ago, the so-called Agency for Breakthrough Innovation, for Leapfrog Innovation, it is very complicated in the classical system of research and development to have such an agency, because all the big universities and research institutions said we can do the same, but it's another task, another view by the Agency of Breakthrough Innovation. I think we have to work more in this direction to bring indeed new innovations on the market, breakthrough innovation on the markets, and policymakers have to support such processes, not only with money, also if it is necessary with removing of any regulation barriers to bring new models on the market. But this is, from my opinion, a chance for breakthrough innovations also in Europe, Germany, or some other member states also have similar agencies, and we have to work closely together in this area to have such innovations here from European ground.
Karma, do you see that as useful, that kind of breakthrough fund?
Absolutely crucial. And as I mentioned, we need to solve all the problems along the value chain. So funding R&D is important. Accessing early stage money for startups, I think this is covered. We still need money for scale-ups. The European Tech Champions Initiative for the European Investment Bank is one important instrument, but we need to attract big investors to invest in European companies, but still we lack the last piece. Where these digital companies go public. They cannot go public in Europe because they need to choose if they go public in Germany, Spain, in France, in Italy. We should need a European NASDAQ for the digital companies. Otherwise, it makes no sense. And it's the same price, you go to NASDAQ in the United States. So we lose it in the way. We have the talent, we have the scientists, we have the researchers, and then we lose it on the way. We are funding them with public money until they become competitive, and then we lose the talent, we lose the capacity of creating value in Europe, because either they find the money easier and much more money elsewhere, or they go public elsewhere. And I think we need to have all the cycle closed within Europe.
Stefan, we're in a room with some of Brussels' greatest minds. Well, being kind to everybody here. What would your recommendations be? We are at a moment of change. We see a new parliament coming in. We'll see a new commission soon. If you had a few things that you wanted everybody to take away, what would those be? Yes,
the main important thing for me is that we have to use the next decade of the commission, the next decade of the digitalization of Europe, and starting at the beginning of next year, end of this year. My wish is that we don't discuss more regulation in the digital sector, but that we strengthen the existing law, and that we discuss how we can implement this so innovation-friendly, so without bureaucracy as possible in the next years. So no new regulation, but a consolidation of the regulatory framework is one thing, and the other thing is to strengthen the financial support for the companies. We have a national law since this year, so we make it easier for example, startups to have IPOs, to have the support of the employee share contribution, for example. These are areas where we have to work in the financial sector. And most important for me to see how can we make this environment as innovation and future-oriented friendly as possible. For example, 2 weeks ago, I had a discussion in Bavaria in Germany, and there was a colleague from Germany, and he was a little bit older. And some years ago, he goes to US, and he was one of the experts who built up Google Translate. He comes from Germany. And I asked him, why do you go to Silicon Valley, and why didn't you develop something like Google Translate here in Germany? And he indeed told me the regulation was too complicated, there was no finance. When he comes to Google, everything was open for him. So we have to find this environment also in Europe, that we can use the experts, and a lot of experts who developed wonderful solutions in Silicon Valley comes from Europe, and we have to make sure that these people stay in Europe, develop these things also here in Europe, so that we as the European Union can grow up.
Karma, do you have some final thoughts for us that we should take away today?
I would ask the Commission for speed. Wherever we implement, good or bad, it must be at the speed. So I think the regulation is as good as it is, and it's a way, it's foreseen to be adapted according to the development of technology. So there are a lot of ways that we can adapt it, and there is a regulation that is a code of practice that can be worked with the industry to see how it can be better implemented. We need to provide, when we issue regulation, we need to provide tools to make it easy for SMEs. Today, AI can implement automatically all these regulations. We should use AI to make regulation fulfillment very easy. But the important thing is speed. Speed to allowing companies to merge, speed to have access to funding, because only with the speed we can really get advantage of the size we have, of the innovative talent we have in our countries, and we should be a little bit more aligned in our global strategies for investment and claim this one single market in the digital sector.
Thank you, Stefan.
And we need more speed in the decision-making processes within the European Union. Yeah, this takes also too much time.
You're the one in the hot seat for a lot of that.
Yes, we do our best. Yeah.
Thank you, Stefan and Carme.
Yeah.
Please stay seated. There'll be a branded segment in a moment by Google titled "The Economic Opportunity of AI in the EU: Behind the Hype," held by Martin Thel, a senior partner of Implement Consulting Group. And afterwards, you'll be very glad to know there will be a network mingle and a coffee for about 30 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.